Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today on this Martin Fiddler Aviation webinar. We're talking about talent and sustainability in business aviation. And I'm joined by the amazing Marc Bailey of the BBGA and Patrick Edmond of Altair Advisory. Both have spent their entire lives in aviation, both commercial and business, and somehow both remain completely enthusiastic and engaged with the industry, and really driving the future of aviation in both of those spheres. So today we will be talking specifically about the war on talent, what the challenges are, how do we get there, where are we going, and the issues of both recruitment and retention within the industry. And then we will be talking about the fight for sustainability. So the need for creating our own narrative, transitioning from where we are now to a more sustainable future, and whether this is going to be a collaborative effort or many individual parts. Please do ask questions throughout the webinar. We are recording it and we will let you have a copy of the webinar within 24 hours after we finish. There'll be time for questions at the end, hopefully. But without further ado, I think we should kick off. So when we refer to the war on talent, what we're really referring to or talking about is an increasingly competitive environment for retaining and recruiting employees into business. And this is not in any way restricted to business aviation or just aviation in particular. It really is a worldwide issue at the moment. Albeit many watching may feel that business aviation in particular has been suffering for quite a while on this. Marc, starting with you, so do you have any thoughts on this talent shortage and where it's coming from, whether there's any exacerbating factors in that?
Okay, I think the important thing you said right at the beginning, this is an aviation issue. And we've got to be really cautious that we focus on it as aviation as a whole. If we just look at sector solutions, then that is just going to store problems up for the future. I'm going to try and do a really quick couple of minute potted history of why are we here, so therefore what we've got to do to turn the clock back. I've got to go back a couple of decades, everyone sighs, but in truth, we changed our approach, particularly in the UK, to focus on academic education. It's good to send your kids to university. And everything that followed on with that was, it's bad to go vocational, it's bad to do anything which is likely to do manual work. So that really set the scene, and parents felt they'd failed if their kid didn't go to university. So that's where we started. We then had the blip in the road, the 2007 crash, which was a really good reminder of how things can hurt us. But that also hit something and stopped people coming into to aviation. And what we've got is, in a number of key areas, demographic cliffs. And what that means is we've got a group of select skills where the average age is over 56. And it's if I did the tailback curve, it's a real steep at the end, a really tapers off down the bottom end. We've not got a lot of youngsters joining us. So that's the shape of the problem before we even hit the pandemic. Pandemic was another wonderful kick in the teeth for our sector, because we had all of the redundancies that people just couldn't avoid. It wasn't people being wicked or nasty, they just couldn't avoid the redundancies. And therefore we had a raft of people that left our sector. And one of the things, we've got people on today, but we did quite a bit as industry to try and retain that talent retention. And try and generate the ability to keep people at least linked to them so we could grab hold of them in the future. That's a later story to talk about what we're doing with that. I think the big issue is that what we're faced with now is that if you look at the economic forecasting, we're still not back to the flying hour rates that we need to be to get back to where we were. Probably late 24, early 25. And not every sector will develop in the same way because of the impact on long haul traffic. there's still going to be pockets of things coming up that will stop that. So we had a little breather from the point of view of needing the resources in order to fulfill those demographic cliffs and the earlier shortfall. However, this year, and we've had a number of events like this where we've looked at trying to recruit people in, and there are significant shortfalls even against that lower demand. So it's a whole series of things, but we've got a big job to do to try and turn that around, which is a different question, but that's why we are in the position that we are in. And now it's up to us with all our enterprises to try and find ways to turn that round. Sorry that went on a bit, but you need to explain where it's sort of starting from.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things for me is when we talk about the shortfalls, most people's minds just automatically go to crew, when in fact there's so many other roles within aviation. And so what do you see? And really this is a question to both of you, where we have the shortfall there, what challenges is it currently posing, and what challenges will it pose if it's not remedied?
First of all, I'd really echo what Mark was just saying about the how we got here, essentially, and the shortfall in many ways, as you've said, Heather, is far broader than just crew. It's also very much ground staff, operational staff, engineers, and so on. And COVID has very much exacerbated that. And I see across the commercial aviation space as well, how an awful lot of operations staff, whether handlers or airline ground staff, realized during COVID, actually, I could go and get a job someplace else and I wouldn't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and stand in the rain and have passengers shout at me. And it's been hard for many operators and handling agents to bring those people back or to attract new ones. And part of what has to happen to bring them back is that they get offered essentially a better kind of package, which in turn impacts on costs for the industry. And we've had a bit of a breather in the sense that COVID has brought demand down. But even, for example, this morning, EasyJet has just published its trading update where they say demand is really strong for the year ahead. And we're expecting to do better than expected and make a profit and carry lots more passengers. And we'd expect to see the same story from other low-cost airlines like Ryanair tomorrow, Wizz Air tomorrow, Ryanair next week. And that means that I think we're coming into another crunch for the months ahead in terms of adequate staffing. Again, that's on the commercial side, but I think, Mark, you're absolutely right. Rather than doing it sector by sector, we have to think about what's happening overall in our industry. And I think to bring these people back, part of it is making this a more attractive workplace again.
It's, and I just want to emphasize what you said, Patrick, the way that we've been trying to deal with it is we're looking at it as 3 core streams: flight operations, ground operations, and airworthiness, all the old engineering things together. There is another one actually with what we're doing with network management and how we're training air traffic and those guys as well. That can't be taken for granted. That's another important element. But we've got to draw all of those things, and a lot of our discussions earlier this year were with those ground staff and the shortfalls that are there, because exactly what you say, people have chosen another option, not necessarily because it was softer, but because it was more secure. And therefore, we've got to offer a package and security. And it's one of the important elements that came up recently was it's not like you're just joining aviation. And this was when we were pitching to youngsters. You're not joining aviation to just join this element of it. What we're offering is the aviation city. So you could join as somebody in ground operations, but there's no reason why you can't move out of that, gain other skills, and choose to do something completely different. A great example, the lady who's currently running Heathrow operations, sort of on the ground side for the airport authority. She actually left school at 16, and her circumstances weren't great. yet she chose to go into aviation, picked up various skills and moved her way up that chain. And it's the sort of examples where it can be done by anybody like that that are really important. So it's a bigger opportunity in aviation than just going to join engineering or just going to flight ops. It's really, really wide opportunity.
Okay, so I think that segues kind of into sort of the first part, which maybe is attracting talent. And you could look at the new generation Z coming in, but there's also, you know, coming in from other industries, people coming from other walks of life at different ages. How do you see the progress is being made in attracting new talent? Mark, start with you.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I was giving Patrick some airtime. It's really important that there's multiple steps to this. A few events that we had recently. There was an event at Farnborough at the beginning of the week, and I mean I know Richard's on this call from TRS. A good 30 or 40% of those people were actually second career individuals that were looking to come in. So it isn't just the picture of selling to the 8-year-old to convince them of taking the right qualification. And yes, we've got to do all of that. And there's a hell of a structure behind what we do in terms of getting that, then the vocational training, packaging around the country, then into the universities. It's a whole pathway to be done there. But equally, we've got to say there is no reason why you, Heather, why you, Patrick, can't come and join aviation at whatever age you are, because we've got opportunities for you there. And that's a very different sell to try and do. And you've got to try and package that in such a way, we're offering you security and a future, and actually here's your employment. So therefore you can get paid, you can get these benefits. So it's an interesting mix there. It's not as simple as I just explained it. It takes a lot of thinking to push that through.
I think you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think there are always people out there who are really keen to come into the business, whether they started thinking about it at 8 years old or at 48 years old. Last week, I was teaching a class of MBA students on an aviation management MBA in Istanbul, and it's clear that the next generation is revved up for this one already. I think part of the challenge, though, that we're seeing increasingly is, whereas if you go back, let's say 20 years, aviation is this glamorous industry. So you're really buying into the, if you like, the glamour and the world travel and the opportunities. Whereas over the last couple of decades, especially over the last few years, we've seen that gloss being tarnished to some extent, as there's more and more discussion. We'll come to it in a few moments, talking about sustainability. But I spoke a while back to one of the senior managers, for example, in KLM in the Netherlands, who was talking about their sustainability policy and mentioned that not only are they doing this because it's the right thing to do and they have to do it for ESG reasons and so on, but also because that's actually really important to them in terms of attracting talent, because they're hearing more and more from younger people, why would I want to go and work for an airline? In the same way that why would I want to go and work for a tobacco company, or why would I want to go and work for a big oil company? That doesn't fit with my personal values. So I think that's part of the narrative that we as an industry need to think about for the future too.
Yeah. Completely agree. And sorry, I'm very conscious of time, and it's my fault for starting a couple of moments late. Just moving on from the recruitment quickly to the retention side of things, and Mark, you mentioning sort of quite eye-opening the age range right at the beginning. What work is being done to retain talent within aviation?
I think that we've got to do the work. I'm not going to claim that everyone is doing it right now. I think there's still some old mentalities where people hold on to individuals. They make their life easier by not letting people necessarily move on. I think we've got to encourage the culture where we're actually pushing people out, and not out of, it used to be leave our industry and go and get experience somewhere else. No, to other areas within aviation, go out and get that experience. And with that comes the interest and a reason for being retained. If you end up staying anywhere for 4 or 5 years, the edge will go off it, and particularly if you're not encouraged to do it. So we've got to work harder at making that happen throughout all the large organisations, all the smaller organisations, and then push it from an academic perspective as well, in terms of our teaching to people. This is a new way that we've got to behave to help people develop.
To that, I'd add as well that, again, leaving flight crew out of this, but thinking about, for example, ground roles and operation roles, historically, aviation has not been a particularly high-paying industry in that way, but part of the compensation is it's a glamorous place to work. And especially, again, I go back to the commercial side, but especially with the, let's say, the industrialization of low-cost carriers and the growth we've seen and crowded terminals and delayed flights and congestion and so on, that glamour has kind of disappeared to a large extent for a lot of staff. And when that was part of the compensation for perhaps not being paid so highly, the equation for staying around doesn't look quite so attractive anymore. So I think we are going to see changes in the future just to retain people along the lines of, okay, we recognize this isn't the same industry as it was a few years ago. Now we need to offer you a little bit more in salary terms or in benefits terms.
Yeah, that's one element where, and I think it's a broader aviation, but actually for business aviation and elements of commercial GA, the interest there, because you're doing broader roles,
yes,
you're
directly
facing customers, can be more attractive. But I don't want to set one up against the other. From that point of view, we've got to get people in, because some people like routine. Some people like to work in a big hangar on a major check, where others prefer to run around on the line and do small tasks and get an aircraft away. It's different, and that's the way we've got to look at it.
That's absolutely right.
Different skill sets.
And just to sort of, I could talk about this or talk about talent all day. For me, one of the things that I love and what keeps me engaged is the constant change in scenery. And actually, we're going to talk about sustainability now. Actually, this is a huge challenge, and getting involved in it keeps me wanting to come back, because it's always moving. There's always new things to be involved with. So sort of going into that, I think, we can't pretend that the industry doesn't need to engage in sustainability and climate change and everything that's going on. And 3 years ago we were talking about carbon offset programs, then we started talking about sustainable aviation fuels, SAF. Now you can't go onto social media without seeing the electrification of aircraft and hydrogen propulsion systems and everything that's going on. Patrick, I adore some of your comments on LinkedIn in particular, which calls out quite a bit of the greenwashing that's going on. From your perspective, in the fight to become sustainable, what is actually going to create real change in aviation, and what timescales are there?
That's a great question, Heather. And you're right, there's an awful lot of hype about hydrogen. There's an awful lot of talk about new electric aircraft that are being developed and so on. And these will come in time. But electric aircraft will initially be relatively small aircraft for relatively short ranges. Hydrogen will initially in fuel cell aircraft be, again, relatively small regional aircraft. The notion that we will have, or the vision of having hydrogen airliners that can transport a lot of people a long distance, is 20 years away or more. And if I bring it back to business aviation, the big attraction of business aviation is that you are freed from the constraints of commercial aviation. You can go from where you want to go to where you want to go when you want to go. And take hydrogen, for example, that's going to need an entirely new airport fueling infrastructure. So that really doesn't work with the advantages of business aviation in the short term. So I think what's going to change things, what's going to enable that transformation over the next few years, is going to be sustainable fuel. And the SAF production infrastructure is going to ramp up extremely fast, whether it's the mandates in the US, whether it's the mandate and the incentives in the US, whether it's the mandates in Europe. We see an awful lot of suppliers looking at how they can produce more SAF for the market very, very quickly. And I'd say also that the business aviation community has in fact led the way in some ways there, for example, by putting book and claim systems in place, which have enabled the efficient uptake of SAF across the world. So I think fuel is really where it's going to be at in the coming the coming few years to make this happen.
And I mean, one of the things I find it fascinating looking at all of this stuff and how it's posted in the media. And we'll go and talk about investment on that in a little bit. But Mark, you and I have discussed creating a narrative and actually aviation owning its own narrative from a BBGA, from an association perspective. How important do you feel that narrative is? And also, do you feel that sort of your members are waiting for you to create the narrative, or whether members are actively wanting to be involved in that?
I think that the people are they're interested, but yeah, we talked about greenwashing. There's far too much greenwashing going on, and what we're not really focusing on is it's vitally important. You use the term transformation, Patrick, and how we manage this transformation is vital. We've stated, the UK government has stated, that we want to be a global leader in GA. They've actually said that to be the best, but I always try and tailor them down to let's be realistic. But the point is, if we want to be leading, then we've actually got to try and get our hands on the train set. And for the development of all the modern technology, for everything that we're going to do in terms of training the people, we have to make the UK highly attractive. So through that transformation process, what we can't do is shut down aviation coming into the UK. Whatever random policy we've got to ban sort of business aviation, or even variants on that, or heavy tax regimes that will undermine it. The narrative should be, we want to, as a community, transition to the new model with electrification, hydrogen, new technology not known yet, as soon as we possibly can, and we will embrace it. We want to get there as quick as we possibly can achieve. What we mustn't do is destroy our industry while we're getting there by greenwashing. And there's a real balance to be had there, because it's not that we don't care. Something that you said, Heather, was really important. We had a session with colleges. It was actually Stansted College. They got 500 youngsters there being trained specifically in the vocational areas. Those youngsters, we were asking the questions. They, when asked how they thought we were performing as far as fuel burn and everything that we do, we were seen, even by those people in aviation, as the sinners of the universe. And they didn't appreciate the actual figures in terms of what we really do burn, the impact that that has. But that's not a defense strategy. You can't answer that. Every time we get a question in the media about one person flying on an aircraft, or you cannot use the old-fashioned strategies of trying to defend that. It just doesn't cut it.
That's right.
So we've got to get the narrative that says we want to move forward as quickly as we possibly can. This is what we're doing. We want the best brains to be developing what we can in the UK. We mustn't disadvantage ourselves, and we've got to put ourselves in a position to be those world leaders if we possibly can in that. So it's a different narrative, a different twist. And the one thing I never give oxygen to those media organizations who wish to say bad things, fat cats, whatever version of is going on, because it just doesn't improve anything for aviation as a whole.
I think you're absolutely right about having to drive that narrative, Mark. And I think there's a lot of scope to do so. So we see, for example, again, I look at the commercial side a little bit. We see airlines, many of them moving away from offsets, which are fairly, I'll say, discredited or unreliable. For want of a better word. I'll take EasyJet as an example, who actually said, we're not going to be offsetting anymore, but we are following the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, to focus on sustainable fuel and later to focus on hydrogen and so on. So that's a much more proactive approach. And equally, we're seeing a lot of airlines buying into sustainable fuel. We're actually seeing interest from other sectors. So, for example, there are leasing companies who want to invest in sustainable fuel production. I'm seeing investment interest from sectors I wouldn't necessarily expect, looking at ways to accelerate the take-up of sustainable fuel. And I would actually say that's probably an opportunity for the business aviation community as well, to say, okay, how can we come together to accelerate sustainable aviation fuel availability, because it's going to be scarce for a while. But even if there's investment in sustainable fuel, which can then be available to business aviation operators, that's a way of owning the narrative and not being on the back foot in that respect.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Patrick. Sorry, cut in, Heather. You wanted to come.
No, it was a thing that I've been sort of talking about, and I know a couple of the attendees we've spoken about this in the past. When we talk about the sort of new technologies and the investment in it, I mean, one of the problems with investment is that the investors want their money back. They want the return on the investment, and you've got a certain amount of risk capital that you're putting into that. But ultimately, you know, the timescales on the investment might not reach the new technologies, and certainly then getting it approved by the regulator and whatnot. But it increases, or it makes an increasingly competitive space. Do you feel that there might be a potential negative where you've got multiple OEMs, technology companies competing to get the investment, and actually what you're not getting is a much more collaborative, we all need to work together and share this technology to get it moving as quickly as possible?
Oh, that's a super question. There's a lot of different technology providers innovating in the sustainable fuel production business at the moment. So there's new technologies being developed. There's some established pathways and established technology providers. But the other unknown is on the demand side. If you're going to invest in building a plant, you want to make sure that you know what the demand for your product is, what the revenue is going to be. And that's still a little bit unclear because some of the policy measures still have to settle down. But I think what we're seeing is more and more clarity coming both from the policymakers and from intermediaries who are saying, okay, how can we consolidate demand from different operators and provide guaranteed demand at a guaranteed price to allow investors to have some comfort, because there are investors out there who are focused on sustainability investments, who are unlocking public sector co-investment, and who are looking at this over a longer time scale than I just want to flip this in 3 years' time. It's more, I want to hold on to this and develop this for a much longer period.
Cool. Just before we move into questions, because I'm very conscious of time, one of the things I think, Mark, you mentioned it earlier, was regulations, and actually sort of tightening of regulations. And I know Patrick and I have spoken about this before. Do you feel that there's a political risk to business aviation with increasing regulations, that politicians, business aviation is an incredibly easy scapegoat? Do you feel there's any tension there, and what do you see in both your respective areas?
I think there's a strong link in the drive to what we're talking about with sustainability, and our friends in HMRC are conflicted from the point of view of, if we really want to drive this forward on behalf of the UK, we've actually got to involve not just investors and industry, but the tax has got to be amended as well. The only way we can drive that, trying to get people to take up on SAF, is not an easy battle, to be honest. And not everybody has the conscience that we would like, where it's a 90% pickup. Life isn't like that. So we have to drive the market. I'm not an interventionist by any stretch of the imagination, but there are times if you want to make a difference, and we do with our COP integrity, I believe that we've got to try and drive this from the centre as well. So to me, that's a vital part of it. I don't know really what else to say, because I think that's the strongest element that's really driving this. We can do all of the good things that we wish to ourselves, but there's only so much that you can convince people if there's such a big difference in price.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably true. I mean, what I'm conscious of as well. So Willie Walsh, the director of IATA, the Airline Association, has talked about how airlines' social license to operate, in other words, kind of the public acceptance that airlines will continue to fly and to develop, is contingent upon them being seen to be taking environmental issues seriously. So there's a real need for all sectors to show that they're taking it seriously. In an EU context, EU policymakers are preparing for a revision of the basic air services regulation, which makes the rules for an awful lot of commercial transport around Europe. And it's clear from the straws in the wind that they're going to be getting more selective in what kind of aviation they want to support. So, you know, regional flights that are enabling people in remote areas to stay connected, that's a good thing. Flights that are competing with high-speed railways, that's probably not a good thing. Low-cost airlines that are competing with below-cost fares, that's not a good thing. So once they start making the naughty and nice lists, then you have to worry which one you're going to end up on and think about how to be proactive. Back to what you were saying, Mark, about the narrative, about setting a narrative to make sure you don't end up on the wrong Santa Claus list.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of questions. The first one was actually the first question we received by email at the point that he registered. So I'll just go refer to Adam Harris's email. It was quite a long question. So for everybody attending, I'm going to do a little synopsis of it. So Adam was skeptical about the headlong rush by some OEMs into hydrogen and electric power, and whether or not, and Patrick, you touched on this earlier, whether or not they're actually true options for both commercial and business aviation, or whether in itself it's actually greenwashing. Do you care to comment?
Sure. And I think, you know, if we fast forward 20 years or 30 years, hydrogen and electric will be huge parts of the energy mix for aviation, but they are really long-term options in terms of moving the dial on aviation emissions. We will see electric aircraft over the next few years, but they will be small regional turboprop aircraft. That's really important, in the same way that the Tesla Roadster was a really important step towards electric cars. They didn't sell very many Tesla Roadsters, didn't go very far, but it was developing the technology that could subsequently go into the mass market. So I think electric aircraft will come. Hydrogen aircraft, there'll be regional hydrogen fuel cell aircraft over the next few years. Those will grow progressively. But as I mentioned, hydrogen fueling infrastructure is going to bring some of its own challenges. But realistically, over the next 10 to 15 years, like I say, I think sustainable fuel, which can drop into existing aircraft, which is key, is really going to be the only game in town. And there's a lot of hype going on across different technologies, and the greenwashing can take two forms. It can take the form of, don't worry, we don't have to do anything because these wonderful technologies are riding over the hill to save us. Or on the other hand, it can be, don't worry, we don't have to do anything because we can just sell you an offset for $5 and that's your get out of jail free card. And those are two different kinds of greenwashing, and we have to avoid both of those temptations.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick. A question that we had on the talent side was, or revolves around diversity, and whether or not sort of with the new generation coming in, that we are going to get sort of a diversity that we don't currently have within business aviation, or is there the danger that employers employ like for like, and you end up with the same diversity with a new generation that you've got the existing generations? Mark, you and I were chatting about this earlier, and you had some really interesting thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I think that there is when you've got an established community with more mature people in it, if that's the most subtle way I can put it, there is a strong chance that things can be created in their own image. And therefore, I think we've got to me, the bigger issue is whatever we do, we've got to ensure, if we need 30,000 people coming into aviation for the next 3 years, we need to get that 30,000 people in. What we shouldn't be doing is get drawn into some of the things, and I know there are areas of government that love to see quotas and everything like that. We should just have really positive diversity policies, which ensures that it is open to everybody to come and join us in aviation. There shouldn't be any barriers. The selection process should be the selection process. and then we can get the mix within what we actually receive as the total number. I find I get a little worried if we get too tailored and too focused in terms of our diversity efforts, that we will miss just encouraging people into aviation. I'm probably saying something that's against the flow there, but it's just important that we encourage people into aviation and then do our best within that.
I've got so Richard has got his hand up. I'm just going to invite him on because you were talking about him earlier, Mark. So Richard, I hope that's okay. She says, allowing the Richard, yes, you're there. Hello. Richard?
I don't think he's frozen. He's just not, he's got his mute on at the moment. He's not now.
Here we are. There we are. We're off. We're off.
Hi, Richard.
And, sorry, slightly larger, and I've got this hoodie thing on to keep me warm. So do forgive me. But Heather, look, thank you for this, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to come in here. I mean, essentially, I look after a program called the Aviation Skills Recruitment Platform and Talent View Aviation, which is strongly supported by BBGA and other membership organisations across aviation, large carriers, airports, etc., which was initially set up to support people during pandemic that were losing their jobs, retaining people, and trying to bring people back into the industry as and when recovery took place. And so the focus now is heavily on recruitment. It's part of a focus on trying to bring experienced people in and people from schools, colleges, and universities. And the point that Mark raised earlier on about vocational education is a very important one. The program itself sits within the framework of the Department for Transport's Flight Path to the Future, which is a medium-term strategy for the recovery of the aviation industry. And this recruitment resource is absolutely free of charge to employers. That means you can come on it, you can register, you can recruit, and it's free to take people on. This is people from universities, colleges, experienced people. You register on one platform, you can use all of them. And what I'd like to be able to do with your permission, Heather, is just share the screen and show you very quickly how to do that. You might need to release me if you dare to. And
well, sorry, Richard, I was going to say we only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
If it's okay with you, what I would propose is if you could send me, I will distribute to everybody who's attending exactly how to do it. I think
we'll do.
If that's okay with you.
Absolutely. And a final point on diversity that colleagues mentioned. It's not only morally right, it makes good business sense. Just tap into your potential wherever it is. And hey, that's Pete. But thank you very much indeed, Heather, for the opportunity to, and Mark and Patrick, and to you all. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So the one last question that we have is, forgive me. So Patrick, you and I were talking earlier on the sustainability element, and we were talking about non-CO2 emissions. We get very focused on the CO2 emissions. And I saw one of your comments on LinkedIn this morning about that. Maybe you just want to quickly comment on non-CO2 emissions within aviation, and actually whether those are low-hanging fruit that we could.
And this, if you like, is a good news, bad news kind of story. The bad news is that researchers are finding that a lot of the climate impact of aviation is not down to the CO2 coming out of the engines, but it's actually down to what are called non-CO2 effects, either other gases being released or contrails in the atmosphere causing a heating effect. That's the bad news. The good news is this does look like relatively low-hanging fruit to deal with, especially contrails. So there are a number of research projects underway. There are companies like Satavia in the UK doing some really interesting work on predicting where contrails will be generated and allowing aircraft operators to flight plan to avoid those. So This is in a way something we didn't realize was a problem until recently, but now we can actually see a relatively easy solution for it. So this is something that the industry is I think keen to get behind and should indeed get behind, because it's a relatively simple and quick fix.
Thank you very much. Before we close, Marc, Patrick, do you have any final comments that you'd like to make?
Just a very brief comment. I really see across the industry more and more emphasis on sustainability and how to bring about that transformation that we've been talking about. I know, for example, the training division of Airbus, Air Business Academy, has just launched a course in civil aviation carbon neutrality. So they're going out and providing training for companies who want to understand what they can do, how they can shift their operations, how they can start reducing emissions. And I think we'll see more and more of that. So that's also, to echo Mark's point, that's a way of bringing more energy and more attractiveness back into the industry, because as you said yourself, Heather, this is the kind of challenge that aviation people like. We don't like doing routine things. We like finding new solutions. And I think being able to pilot that transformation is going to be fundamental for us over the coming years.
Thank you. Marc?
Just as a link to the mention of future flight, I think one of the things that people tend to do is talk about the new technology, next generation, and everything as though it's going to be something new. And actually, all it is building on the existing skill sets that people in aviation have. So, we went from having fiber optics, from having just electrical wires. It's the same thing with a lot of the technology associated with what's going on with drones and autonomous vehicles. You do additional modules and you gather your competency within what you were doing previously. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to get the flow of people in and then give them the additional skills, including retraining the more mature folk in our industry as well to be able to do these things. And that transition is important because I think Patrick said it, it's not going to be very long before we start to see piloted multi-rotor vehicles in use. There are plans for some towards the beginning of next year to start to be in place. So as soon as we start to have that, then we're going to have different networks, different places of departure. It won't just be all the old airfields. So there's a lot to do there that will develop and emerge. And actually, dare I say it, will make aviation a little bit more sexy again.
Well, that's what we all want. Well, okay, I apologise, we've overrun by a couple of minutes. Massive thank you, Marc. Massive thank you, Patrick. Thank you to everybody that has attended and for your questions. If you have more questions, let me know and we will try and answer them probably with another session. We will be providing you with a recording of today's webinar, most likely within the next 24 hours, unless I have more technical issues. Visit our website, martinfiddler.com, for news, events, more webinars, etc. It just leaves me to say thank you, and hope to see you all again soon. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.